Hello everyone. So today this lesson is going to be about activity. And activity is, in my opinion, the single most important thing that you need to understand in chess in order to play good moves. There's a lot of ways to define activity. Let's start with the most simple, most baseline way. And that way is really just square control. Activity is at a base level square control. So, the rook here is controlling a lot of squares. This is a good active rook. But, if the rook were behind all these pawns, this rook would not be very active. And this rook would be what we would call passive, especially let's say, let's put some moves on the board. If you are worried, let's make some more moves. Let's play a5. So here, right, there's a threat. And there's a couple things that can be done about the threat. Not very many good options. The best option is probably knight here, and just giving away this pawn. This is a passive move, because the only point of this move is to defend f7, and the knight is easily eliminated anyway, meaning it doesn't even really solidly defend f7. But activity is all about square control, and we are always striving for more square control. So that leads us to a pretty simple rule, and the rule is, if we can go forward, if we've dealt with all the opponent's threats, we should default to going forward. I have a game that I want to show where I think this is illustrated quite well. So this game was me versus 2250, and we played a Sicilian. And this is the first interesting moment. Now, there's a number of interesting moves. He's hitting the bishop here. He's throwing like a small threat. And I've played bishop c4, bishop d3, bishop e2. They're all reasonable moves. But here, in keeping with the spirit of the lesson, we go forward. We play the most active move that we can. Knight f3, challenging the knight, right? This is defended. True, we lose our bishop pair, but activity supersedes all other considerations. Always, there's no exceptions. So he takes, so we're down this bishop pair. What do we get in return for the bishop pair? So in this position, it's black's turn. We have two pieces developed. We can castle whenever we want. Black is 1, 2, 3, 4 turns out from castling. That's a lot, and a lot can happen in those 4 turns. So we've got superior development and better king safety, and also we have this amazing post in the center for our queen. If we play d4 and he takes, normally queen takes, not a good move because there's knight c6 to kick the queen away. But here, the queen is actually quite immovable on the d4 square. So we've lost our bishop pair, but we've gained activity and compensation. So we're going forward. We always want to default to going forward. And here, there's we could develop this bishop. Let's just castle the king. Let's be safe. And we want to default to active moves, right? So active moves are not only moves that go forward, but also moves that carry a threat, right? You know, this move goes forward and carries a threat, but it's not maybe it's a good move, but it's not the best move in the position. So here I played the best move. Black played d6. What is the drawback of the move d6? The drawback of the move d6 is it closes off this bishop. So now, if we were to play a4, there's not a b4 response. And the pressure on a4 is actually kind of intolerable. One, I can just take twice. And two, if I were to take, this pawn is pinned. So even if a black plays a move like queen d7, say, defending this pawn, I still win the pawn. So a4 is a good move. Here my opponent, you know, they have pressure that they need to deal with. There's really only two ways to deal with it. It's to take and to go here, giving back their bishop pair. So they take. And here we have a choice, right? We want to go forward and we want to create threats. That's our primary objective. So we can take with the queen. If we take with the queen, black is going to block with the bishop. And we're going to have to move our queen somewhere else. We can take with the rook, but the rook, it looks kind of awkward. There's no obvious purpose. There's no obvious reason why the rook is better on c4 or b4. In fact, it's kind of just tactically liable on b4. And on c4, same thing. I'm sure the rook runs into some, tempo eventually, maybe this tempo. So the rook is actually kind of optimized here. It's placing pressure on this weak pawn. The rook is doing nicely. So here I came up with the idea, okay, I want to take with the knight so that I can go forward and create threats, right? We want to be active. So I took with the knight. My opponent just developed. So in keeping with our idea, we want to play forward and be active. So I hit the rook. This forces a response. And my queen is now able to slide over and check him. And we can see there's no blocking because the knight, the active knight, is placed to stop that. And the bishop can't block either. So the king actually has to go up. So the game's not over yet, right? Let's go back to our basic principle. We want to go forward and create threats. This is our default. It should always be our default if we are allowed. Some pressure on the e4 pawn. Our knight is just hanging for free. So, we can look at moves like bishop g5, but he just goes f6 and this helps him because now he's got squares to run away to. So we don't want to go bishop g5. So let's just deal with our opponent's threat, right? We don't want to let our opponent take this for free, and we want to develop our pieces. So, we finish complete development, parry the threat, and now, the bishop could be useful on this c5 square, maybe checking the king, the bishop and queen working together. So here, my opponent plays just a disastrous blunder. Knight f6, and again, the position's already quite difficult, but this move completely ignores kind of an auxiliary threat of bishop e3, just that I want to go e5, and it cannot be taken because this is like checkmate. He's got queen there, and he loses a queen for no compensation. So I play e5, and I mean, this situation is desperate for black. This move is coming, and this move is very scary. So let's see. You could consider this move. I might play that move. This move is obviously bad. It's just you're decreasing your activity. This move hangs a knight. This move looks a little loose. We could consider that, but it is guarded by the bishop. But if if you're black in this situation, you need to be active, right? Active play, that is the call. And I think knight e4 is probably going to be the best move, because it guards the g5 square, so bishop g5 is not in. It guards the c5 square, so this move is also iffy, and it guards the d6 square. So in short, it guards all the squares that are important. Okay, opponent does not do that. Opponent plays kind of a lethal blunder, knight d7, and we want to go forward, we want to create threats. This is a check, a threat that must be answered. It's pretty obvious to establish that king takes is not going to work out with this rook coming in. Yeah, so our opponent doesn't play that. Also, this bishop coming in, it's just very bad on a lot of levels. At minimum, I think black is going to lose a piece. Check. Okay, you cannot move because you drop the knight with like check, and you lose the queen and you lose the king. To demonstrate, let's just, okay, yeah, you're gonna get mated here. So you have to go, bishop d5, and at minimum, there are, I'm sure, better moves. Like I'm sure bishop f4 is a good move. Extracting just a tiny bit more from the position. There's no e5 because of check. Even if, just to illustrate how white could win material, we can just take dealing with the threat. Well, this is pretty forced. This is all forced, and then I have this move in the end, and I win a bishop. Okay, so our opponent doesn't take that. They play king here, and this knight is pinned. We attack pinned pieces. We go forward, and this is the last move of the game. I mean, there's no recovering from this one. This is just too far gone. And yeah, my opponent resigned. So what can this tell us? So for me, this game is very illustrative of just how powerful it can be to go forward and create threats. Right? This whole game, there's not a single move where, there's only one move where I move backward, and I was forced, right? When they played a6, I have to go backward, and I want to go back to a central square. But the whole rest of the game, all I did was move forward, and I created threats, and then my opponent collapsed. So this should be our default mode. But you can't always go forward. You can't always create threats because your opponent's not always going to let you go forward and create threats. But that should be your default. When you see your opponent is attacking, you should always look, is there a counterattack? When you see, when you're looking for candidate moves, you should look at what move increases my activity the most. So we're going to hop over to kind of a more theoretical discussion and talk about, of all things, piece values, because I think it helps illustrate a lot of points related to activity. So let's start with the pawn. The pawn is worth 1, the knight is worth 3, the bishop's worth 3, the rook is worth 5, the queen is worth 9. Okay, now years ago I saw a derivation for how you can get these values, and I think that derivation is actually quite instructive. So the way the piece values are derived is you look at the opponent's half of the board, and you look at the maximum number of squares that piece can control. So this pawn, maximum number of squares it can control is 1, 2. So the pawn is a value of 2. But then you simplify that, divided by 2. So 1, 2 divided by 2 is 1. So we get a value of 1 for our pawn. For the knight, maximum number of squares it can control on the opponent's side of the board is 6. We're not going to count these red because this is on white's half the board. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So the knight has a value of 6 divided by 2 is 3. Bishop, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 6, divided by 2 is 3. Rook, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, divided by 2 is 5. And queen is a little bit different because it's the rook plus the bishop, so it's 10 plus 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, plus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 16, divided by 2 is 8. But we give the queen an extra point. It's worth 9, not 8, because the queen is able to deliver checkmate by itself with just one supporting piece. And even though it is a combination of a bishop and a rook, it's well known that it's just better than a bishop and a rook because the queen doesn't have to coordinate, right? It doesn't have to coordinate with other pieces. It's able to get the job done by itself. Whereas these pieces have to work together perfectly to be equal value. And often, they're not working together perfectly. There's some imperfection in their coordination, causing them to be worth less. So that's why we give the queen an extra point. And let's talk about the king for a second. So the king, traditionally we say, okay, the king is worth infinity. It doesn't have a value. But that's not true because activity-wise, we want to see how many squares can the king control. And it can control 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All right, 8 squares. So the king has a value by this system of 4, which means that the king is better than either the knight or the bishop, and is part of the reason why we say develop your king in the endgame. So I wanted to start by asking a question, because I think curiosity is very important in chess. Getting good at chess, it takes a lot of work, right? You have to do a lot of studying, and oftentimes that studying, it can be hard to make yourself do that. But curiosity is kind of like a superpower. It allows you to do all that work, and it feels like fun. So I think asking questions is a really, really, really good way to improve your rating. And the question that we have today is, what's better, a bishop or a knight? And I'll let you guys think about that for a second. And think about your answer. And really take it seriously. Okay, there's a lot of different schools of thought, and there's a lot of different answers. And today I'm going to provide an answer that I think is one of the better ones. So some people might feel like the knight is more tricky. The knight can jump over pieces. Maybe it's good in closed positions. Okay, that's maybe true. But again, this whole lesson is about activity, and it's about reducing complicated fluff around chess. So there's so much additional information to just activity, because that's what the game comes down to. And we just talked about how piece value is determined by square control, right? So So the bishop and the knight, they have an equal amount of squares that they can control on the opponent's half the board. So that each can control 6. So they have the maximum kind of ceiling for their value. But the maximum ceiling is not the average ceiling, right? And this is illustrated just by looking at the starting position. Let's say we go e4, e5. Okay. Now let's compare these two pieces. So this bishop can control 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 2. Really can't draw arrows. And this knight can control 1, 2, 3. So the bishop controls, even from the starting position, more squares. And the closer you put the bishop in the center, let's say, let's compare these two pieces. Bishop can now controls 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 squares. And the knight controls 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 squares. So bishops, on average, control slightly more squares. Why is that information important? Well, we just demonstrated that value comes from square control, right? The rook is worth 5 because it controls 10 squares. And the knight is worth 6 because it controls 3 because it controls 6 squares. So the truth is, value is not static. It's not the rook is always worth 5. Oh, the bishop, it's always worth 3. The pawn's always worth 1, right? Value is not static. That's very important. It changes depending on where the pieces are and what squares they're controlling and how many squares they're controlling. More squares equals more value. More important squares equals more value. So square control is the fundamental basis of value in chess. So if we go back to our original question, what's better, a bishop or a knight? We realize, well, if the bishop controls on average more squares than the knight, then the bishop is on average better than the knight. And this is what we observe. This is what grandmasters tell us. The bishop is worth slightly more, maybe worth 3.1, 3.2. Not a huge difference, but a small incremental difference. And what I want you guys to take away from this is this key idea. Value is derived by square control. Okay, so we're talking about activity, and we have our principle that we've already talked about. If we can, we want to go forward and we want to create threats. And we have this idea that value and square control, they're the same thing. So I have another example, and I want to talk about activity. Actually, before we do that, let's do this example. So yeah, let's talk about activity a little bit. Activity is, like I said, the most important thing in chess, but we define it relative to our opponent's activity. So in this position, this is an equal, the starting position is an equal position because both sides equally active. White's the move, so white is slightly better, white is slightly more active, so we give that slight bonus to white. Let's say we just delete all the black pieces and we say, oh, I know a good setup. For the white pieces, it's to put the knights like so, to castle the king. I'm controlling the center. This is good, right? That's wrong. This is not good. You don't know whether this is good or not, because activity is defined relative to your opponent. So if you cover your opponent's half of the board and you only look at your half of the board, and you're like, oh, well, my pieces are developed, I'm doing well, that's not true. And we can prove that. So let's say that, let's just do the starting position. Let's say that black hasn't moved a single piece, and we've achieved this configuration. Here, white's going to have a sizable edge. This is +2, right? There's threats of on f7, and white is completely dominating, +3.5. Cool. So relative to black, white is super active. Now let's say we make some moves for black. White got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 moves. So let's give 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 moves to black. And in this position, it's going to be equal. We're going to give slight edge to white because it's white's turn. So white is slightly more active as a result of that. But it's going to be, like +0.2, +0.3. Okay, it's +0.1. So as close to dead equal as it can get. All right. But now, let's say that we have some sort of ideal setup for black. So we want the king to be castled. Let's get some pawn tension and double the rooks. Let's expand on the queen side and put a bishop on this nice long diagonal, put a knight in the center, put another knight on f4, very good attacking square. This bishop is liable to open up. When this bishop moves, c4 is going to come, and the bishop's going to roar to life on f2. So here, we have the same position for white. White has the same setup. And let's get out of check first. And white is dead lost. And it's very easy to see that white is dead lost because we can see there's tremendous pressure on g2. This diagonal is likely to open up. There's tremendous pressure on f3, and by extension f2. All of black's pieces, maybe we can make it even better by putting the queen here, so the queen's ready to come on over. Let's see how white's doing. It's white to move, and the position is just like almost +6, right? There's no surviving this attack, and the engine just wants to give away an entire bishop. But let's say, let's just go down the line and prove that black is completely winning. Let's go here. You can afford to sacrifice this whole bishop, creating a threat. We want to go forward, create threats. Should you take it, this is happening and you're getting crushed, so you can't do that. So let's say you take d5, go forward, create threats. It's defended backward. So if you were to move, you're getting forked, so you have to lose a piece here. And you're only down a piece, but you're actually down more than that because e4 is coming and f2 is collapsing. And we see in the end, white has no pieces developed and black has all their pieces developed. So even if we go here, okay, just go forward, probably queen c6 come in lining up on d3 or queen g6, jack. Interesting. Taking the bishop, and the reason we're taking the bishop is to solidify this knight. and you can't even take it because you're getting mated here. Okay, so this setup by itself means nothing, because, like we just said, activity is defined in relation to something else. It's always defined in relation to your opponent's activity. So this is very useful, because if you're able to stop your opponent's activity, then you're able to, by contrast, increase your own. And a common example of that is oftentimes white will play the move h3 just to stop bishop g4. And that, even though it's a small move and it doesn't move a piece forward, it increases white's activity because it prevents a main idea for black. And we have to take into account our opponent's main ideas, and stopping them is very useful because activity is relative. It's relative to your opponent. So let's go to my puzzle example. So if you want to take a second, pause the video, think about what you would do here for white. Okay, when I look at this position, white's obviously lacking in development. But they've only got 2 pieces developed, and there's a pretty obvious threat. The queen can't make any threat, everything's defended for black. And the obvious move is, okay, knight c6. Hopefully most of you guys saw that. So the computer responds to knight c6 with queen d6. Okay, we want to go forward, we want to be active. And now we come at this crossroad, and we have a choice. We take the rook, we take the bishop. So when I was calculating this puzzle, I thought to myself, okay, if I take the bishop, he's gonna move his king, but now what? Okay, maybe I'll play d4, but I started to become worried. Like, my knight has no way back into the game. And I'm starting to become worried that he is going to play rook e7, he's going to take my knight, and there's not a single thing that I can do about that. And so I started looking at my other options. I'm like, okay, well, this wins a piece, but it kind of immediately loses it right back. So let's look at our other options. So I looked at taking the rook, and I was like, okay, if we take the rook, he takes back. Okay, we've got to deal with some pressure, right? Certainly got to deal with like knight g4, threatening mate. But it's not so bad. We could play h3, but that's not even necessary. We could even play d4 here, and then if we go down this line, knight g4, queen h6, the idea of d4 becomes clear. There's no queen here because we just take it. Also, the rook is hanging. So I'm like, okay, well, taking the rook looks really good, to be honest. Like, this position looks like, if white survives the danger, with the knight coming to either f3 or to b5, this looks really, really good for white. White's up material. White's already up a pawn, I think. Yeah, white's up 2 pawns, actually. And now they're up the exchange. Like, this is huge. And I missed something. And I played rook take, knight takes bishop, rook, and it was wrong. So there's actually a killer resource in this position after knight takes rook, and it's not taking back. So we talked about two things. Activity is relative, and we want to make forward moves that generate threats, right? So, the move knight g4 comes to mind, and it is an okay move, not the best move. Because the best move is a move that makes a threat and also shuts down white's main idea. And the move is bishop d3. And I'm in love with this move. I think this move is just incredible. So this move, it stops the d pawn from moving. And if the d pawn can't move, then this knight can't really get out, the bishop can't get out, and the rook can't get out. So this move traps, for at least a few turns, all three of these pieces. So this is 11 points of material trapped by 3. And the 3, it's not just trapping these pieces, it's performing a role on the king side, it's throwing a punch. And we're going to see that this bishop is amazingly powerful on the king side as an attacker. Okay, so let's say we just do a nothing move. If we do a nothing move, what's the threat? Well, how is this really bad? I'm up a full rook. Let's save our knight, right? Or up a full rook. Count the rooks, I have more, I'm winning, buddy. Okay, so black's coming in with knight g4, and they're hitting h2. We have to defend it. They're hitting h2 again. And it's kind of clear that we're getting obliterated. Bishop g3 is coming, and queen h2, and we're gonna lose. So, okay, so the threat, I guess, is knight g4. So let's say we don't be greedy, and we stop knight g4. The thing is, black has more than one threat. Black's gonna play this move, queen e6. And the idea is we want to go here, we want to go here, and we want to take this rook. And here, the lack of activity on the queen side is just startlingly apparent. Like, normally a 3 move idea is just not good. To just make one threat, it's not good. But in this case, white has not a single resource that can stop this idea. Okay, Stockfish wants to play this clever move, knight c6, because now if you take my knight, I'm going to take your bishop. I'm going to take your bishop with my queen. But yeah, I can just go here. And you cannot stop this. There's no moves, right? If you go here, that doesn't help. Now you can't stop me from taking this. I mean, let's say you try to create some space, like f3 or f4. f4, let's look at. I can just go check here, and if this, you drop your bishop, and you also are dropping the rook, and you're dropping your king, and you're dropping every single thing that you own. Okay, so you're completely screwed. You're up a whole rook, and there's no way to solidify your advantage. It's minus like 5. Okay. So this move, bishop d3, incredible attacking idea. Cutting all the resources for your opponent, even though you're down a rook, even though you're down a ton of material, it doesn't matter. Black's gonna win. And black's going to win because if you compare the relative activity of black to the relative activity of white, even though white has more material, it doesn't matter. Black has more relative activity, black wins. And black can use that activity to create threats. So black wins. Okay. So let's go back. So the answer is to take the bishop. And we already established that, you know, white's going to lose this knight. But white's still better here, right? If we look at the engine, okay, it's like +2. So why is white better? Okay, let's play d4. There's a threat on c4, so we got to deal with that. Let's say, you know, let's play takes. I'm a little hesitant to play takes because it allows the knight to develop for free. But sure, takes. Let's see what the engine wants. Probably f3. Create threats. So let's see what the engine. Oh, the engine is just saying give away a bishop. That's very aggressive. Oh, that's scary. And have some. The queen is coming in on h2. Fascinating. Okay, let's say the engine plays a little bit more humanly to illustrate our point better. Okay. Here. Here. Cool. So we could evacuate our knight, but this doesn't really evacuate our knight because we abandoned the queen side. So we've got to pay attention to our activity. It says this move, preparing queen g3, should queen g4 happen. So here, we lost our knight, but white's still much better. It's +3. Why is white much better? Well, white is much better because white has 2 extra pawns, and they're passed pawns. And lo and behold, Stockfish just says push the pawns all the way up the board. There's no attack. My queen can always come to g3, and my king is safe. And my passed pawns are going to win the game. And, you know, it's hard to disagree with that statement. Develop. Queen g3, okay. Queen g3 is not optimal. It says take this attacker. And yeah, I was assuming bishop e3, bishop d2, prompting more trades. I would even play rook takes. Okay. He's going to try to threaten my bishop. Probably queen c3. Queen b4 is also good. And there's no threats, right? Knight e4, the knight's controlled by the bishop. It's saying trying to come into f4, but you know, white's going to promote the pawns, black can't stop it. And that becomes a relative factor of the position. So this puzzle is an excellent illustration of activity, and activity being the only thing that matters, because we gave up winning a rook because black has this counter shot of stopping our main idea, our main developing idea of d4. And we take the bishop, not because it wins a bishop, but to buy us time to play this move, d4. Should we play, h3? This is still happening. It wants to throw that in and then throw this in. Again, trying to squeeze all the activity out of the position first. But bishop d3 is still happening. So we gotta pay attention to our opponent's idea, stop it. And now, we influence this c4 pawn, and we have this huge number of passed pawns on the queen side, and that eventually prevails for us. We do have to deal with these very scary attacks. like bishop takes g2. Again, giving away a whole piece for one pawn, right? This is not a materialistic approach. It's an activity-based approach, right? What is this pawn doing? This pawn is able to push to g3, making the dark squares a lot more solid. So we just take it. We take it, and now you don't have a pawn g3, right? My queen's gonna get here whether you like it or not. Let's say you defend like this. What happens? Queen e6, queen here. Let's try to stop development. And we're coming in, and we got knight e3, and activity prevails, right? You just leave your king unattended, bad things happen to it, and activity prevails. The queen is so offsides. So this position has so much richness and so much depth in it that you could find if you were curious. We talked about curiosity being a hack to learn in chess. And right, when I got this puzzle wrong, it was highly downvoted because people saw what I saw. You take a bishop and you lose the knight right back, and they didn't look any further. They downvoted it. They were like, taking the rook is fine. But had they have been curious, had they have looked, they would have found all these amazing ideas and resources that black has. So we're going to look at one final example, and that example is Fischer versus Petrosian. They played a Sicilian. There's an isolated pawn. Trading the dark square bishop benefits white because it helps control the square in front of the pawn. And we're going to start here. So let's take a second. You can pause the video. Think about this position. Who's better? Why they're better? What do we think? All right. So on the king side, we've got equal pawn structure. So king side, nothing much is happening. Black has a little more activity, but there's no target, right? There's no well, you can go forward to attack what, right? You're not going to attack anything if you go forward, and then you're just going to get kicked back. So there's no targets on the king side for either side. Both sides has two rooks. Both sides has a knight and a light squared bishop. So the pieces are kind of equal. So the only difference in the position is really these pawns. So obviously these pawns are better. They're together, they're connected. The connected queenside majority far away from the king. The king's not really able to help stop them quite as well. This pawn, it could be a weakness. It also could be a strength. It is a pass pawn. It's well defended, but it's hard to push, right? Pushing it doesn't seem to yield a positive result because it can't go any further, right? The bishop is blockading. Okay, so I think white is a little better, and the reason white is better is this pawn. This pawn is backward, and it's able to be targeted by this light square bishop and this knight, right? Black would really love to put this pawn on a dark square, play a5, right? And for this game, what we're going to do is every single turn, because the position is so simplified, we're just going to ask ourselves one question. And the one question is, what is our opponent's threat? What does our opponent want to do? If it's their turn, what are they going to play? And here, it's obvious. They're going to play the move a5, right? Because this is the only feature of the position that's important, that's imbalanced. And they're going to try to put their weak pawn on the opposite color of our bishop so that our bishop can never attack it. Okay, how do we stop a5? We play b4. So this is what Fischer does. He plays b4. and opponent plays king f8. King f8 defends the rook, so by contrast his bishop's unpinned. So maybe black wants to play bishop here and bishop here. Okay, how do we stop bishop here? Remember, we want to go forward, we want to create threats. That's the best way to stop our opponent's ideas if we can't stop them directly, is by creating threats that force them to respond. Okay, so knight c5 hits the pawn, which must be defended. It cannot be pushed, because should it be pushed, you're always pushing past, and with this nice passed pawn, white has very good chances of winning. So black can't play bishop c8, so bishop d7, so he plays bishop c8, defending the pawn, controlling the knight. Right, the knight is well controlled. Okay. What's the idea in this position? So black doesn't really have a solid idea. There's no threat, not that I can see. You know, these pieces are tied down. So let's restrict, aim for restriction. White plays a multi-purpose move here, f3. I love this move, very active move. It's active because it restricts the knight. Knight has no forward jumps. And also, our king really wants to be here. And it opens up this direct path to this kind of dream dark square where it can never be harassed by this bishop, and it's very, very hard for this knight to harass it. It takes at least 3 moves. It's an important tip. If the knight is 1 square diagonal of the king, it takes at least 3 moves to land a check. And those 3 moves would be knight here, check. Okay, so the king wants to be here, dream move, restriction, aggression. Okay, so our opponent plays rook a7, defending the pawn, over defending the pawn. Clearly he's trying to free up this bishop. So where does he want to go with the bishop? Well, right, this isn't very good. This just traps his rook. This is bad, loses a pawn. This is bad, can't go there, can't go there, can't go there. So he obviously wants to go again here and fix his weakness. And let's say he's allowed to do that. Let's just say he's allowed to play that way. Here, obviously, if we take this is a disaster, because now this pawn is just dropping, right? So we don't want to let him do that if we can stop it. So we want to play active moves. We want to go forward. We want to create threats, and we want to restrict. So Fischer plays this move, rook e5. How does rook e5 stop or limit black? Okay, it stops this knight from moving. So let's say here takes, black loses this pawn. He can take with the rook, of course, but you know, the knight has an increased restriction. We saw it. Okay, so that's what Petrosian does. He develops the bishop. Now the bishop's coming here. We could play a4, try to stop it. But even if we play a4, he's still going to go here, freeing up the knight, and then go here and trade. And this is not so bad. Maybe, yeah, it's okay for black. So Fischer makes an unusual decision here. He takes the bishop. And this is unusual because this is such a good knight, and this is such a bad bishop. But this is an important decision because it shows, let me just get rid of all that stuff. And let's hide the notation anyway. All right, so it's an important move because we cannot consider things in isolation. Yes, good knight, bad bishop. But what is a bishop doing? The bishop is fixing the biggest issue in black's problem, the position. So we don't want to let them fix the biggest issue in their position. So we just take it. They can't take with the knight, we already established that. So rook takes. Now what is the threat for black? What is black threatening? Okay, black is obviously threatening rook c7, rook c3, coming in on the c file. Not that hard to stop that threat. Rook c1, active play, no activity for our opponent's rook. Okay, they play rook d6. Over defending this pawn, obviously trying to get some freedom for this other rook. But every move has a drawback, right? The rook was defending the c7 square, and now it's not defending the c7 square. So we can come in to c7. Okay, and we're threatening rook e7 with catastrophic destruction. And we talked about stopping the opponent's threat, right? Let's go back. What is the threat? The threat is probably rook here. Let's say we go here, rook here, take, and this pawn is well guarded. This pawn has a rook behind it. Black's probably doing okay in this position. If we play rook c7, this prevents rook e8, or at least it discourages it. How does it discourage rook e8? How are those related at all? So rook e8 takes, king takes, knight takes, doesn't really matter. King takes, rook here, this pawn is going to drop, and there's nothing black can do about it. And then this pawn drops, so these two pass pawns, it's as good as over. So he's tied down to this pawn. So he plays, this move, attacking a rook. Okay, our rook's attacked, we have to deal with it. Go to e2, e1, he chooses e2. Okay, there's not really a huge difference. Let's just take stock of the position, right? This rook can't move, because if this rook moves anywhere, it gives up control of a7. Go rook a7, we win this pawn. This rook cannot move. If it moves, it gives up control of d7, and we take this knight for free. This knight cannot move, because if the knight moves, rook e7 happens, and black loses. The king cannot move, because if it moves, rook e7 happens, black loses. So none of these pieces can move. That's really bad. That's really, really bad. So the only pieces that can move are these pieces. And for the next 10 moves, that's all we're going to see Petrosyan move. He's only going to move these 10 pieces, the 4 pieces. Okay, so he plays g6. Cool. Our opponent's not really threatening anything, so we can improve our position. Moves like a3, a4, king f2, all very good. King f2, h5, expanding on the light squares. Now my instinct is to halt the progress, move like h4. But Fischer plays an even more ingenious move. He plays f4, right? Not only is this halting the progress, but also it's creating a square for the king. So should there be more progress, like this move, every move has a drawback. This h4 move no longer controls g4, and now my king can go and grab this pawn. So it's creating a square for the king, it's stopping this move, and it's discouraging the knight even more from moving. And also there's some aggressive intentions perhaps with f5 in the future. Okay, h4, Fischer's just like, okay, I'm just gonna go win your pawn. Cool. You can't move any of your pieces. All right, there's only one way to stop. King g4. Petrosian stops it. And let's take stock. Okay. So in the last few moves, we went from having 3 pawns on the second rank to no pawns on the second rank, which means this knight is even more pinned than it was before, because now not only is this going to win pawns, getting a rook on e7, it's going to probably end up in checkmate. So the second rank has been drastically weakened. Okay, so black still can't do anything, and we would like to get our king to d4, right? I mean, in this position, if it's me playing, okay, maybe black's gonna play like this way, but there's a lot of time, right? Fischer, he wants to, rush this king to the middle of the board. Okay, so he wants to get the king to the ideal square. Petrosian sees that, and he's like, no, you can't get your king to the ideal square. All right, but every move is with a drawback. The drawback of this is a nice square for the bishop now. Okay, so the king is in blockading position for the pawn. And suddenly, like we said, black could only move these 4 pieces. So he moved all these 4 pieces, and now he has no moves left. Ah, shoot. He has no moves left. He can't move this pawn. Can't move this pawn. If he moves this pawn, it falls. If he moves this pawn, it falls. If he moves this rook, this falls. If he moves this rook, this falls. He can still move the king, move like king f7, and struggle on just a little bit, and just keep moving the king back and forth. Actually, this position is still Zugzwang, because we have all the same problems. None of the pieces can move, and if you are to move the king away, rook e7 happens. So the Zugzwang is inevitable. Petrosian buckles, and he moves one of the pieces that we said he couldn't move. Okay, moves the knight, and Fischer demonstrates. He says, "Nah, you can't move that. We talked about this." He plays rook e7, and Petrosian says, "Haha, I forked all of your pieces. I'm winning." Right, and this is how we should try to defend. Active defense is good, but here the rook's on the 7th, too strong, too active, and this knight hitting a couple pawns is not going to matter. So check, getting out of the threat, and then saving the other rook from the threat. Okay, so black can take either of these pawns. If he takes this pawn, can't take back because the rook hangs. So he takes this pawn, he chooses that one. So a lot of people would, I think, be tempted by a move like rook here. Now, problem with a move rook here is Black only has one move. He's gonna find his one move. He has to go here, check, here. So when we're attacking, we've got to be persistent with our ideas. This idea, rook a7, is a good idea, but keep in mind this resource, rook f6. Now let's imagine a situation where we had a move, a check with this bishop, like bishop here check, or bishop here check. That would be checkmating, because the king would have to lose contact and we would mate. So Fischer sees this, he plays bishop c4. And there's no rook f6, right? Because our rook's still guarding that. We didn't give that one up. And should, he attack our bishop, we counterattack. And now this doesn't work. So this is actually, I think it's the last move of the game. Yeah, I think bishop c4 is the last move of the game. And let's talk a little bit about, I just want to sum up everything that we learned today. So we started off with our rule. Our rule, activity is king. If we can, we always want to go forward. We always want to create threats. That's our default mode. Lesson number 2 is value comes from square control, which supports the idea that we always want to go forward. We always want to create threats, because pieces that are well developed control more squares and are able to create more threats. So value changes depending on how many squares a piece controls. More is better. So develop our pieces. And 3, activity is relative. If we can stop our opponent's activity, if we can stop them from achieving what they want, we get what we want, which is our opponent not doing anything active. And that was illustrated by Fischer in this game right here. And 4, the idea, the takeaway that I had from this game is moves have drawbacks, right? When you go rook a7, what do you undefend? You undefend the e5 square, rook e5. When you go, when you go rook d6, what do you undefend? The c7 square, rook c7. Permanently pinning your knight. When you go h5, what do you undefend? The g4 square. I'm going to go collect your pawn. Right? When you go d4, what do you undefend? The c4 square, which allowed Fischer to play this knockout blow, bishop c4. So, yeah, those 4 ideas. Always go forward if you can. Always, always, always default to going forward and creating threats. Value is relative. Value changes depending on what other pieces are doing. Always be willing to trade a material exchange for more activity. 3, activity is relative. Relative to your opponent. Stop your opponent's ideas. That makes you more active. 4, every single move has a drawback. Thank you guys. I hope you guys learned something and had fun.